Hello, and welcome to my very first live stream. The song you just heard as an introduction was the Norwegian Dance, opening 35 by Edward Grieg. And it's a song I've heard quite a lot lately when watching various episodes of Unpopular Opinions. A certain octopus has a tendency to play a bastardized version of this song, and I figured I'd do my part in bringing back some class to the whole thing. This being my first live stream, it is not something I am very comfortable with, so you're gonna have to bear with me if I make any mistakes or if I have any technical difficulties. I'm also running on a bit of a scuffed setup in terms of my microphone and headphones, so maybe the quality of the audio isn't the best. Before we get into the topic at hand, I want to do just a little bit of housekeeping in terms of the channel. Give me a moment here. I will share my screen. Firstly, I'd like to comment on the watch time from subscribers and do the regular YouTube shilling if anyone is watching this in the VOD. I have 25% view percentage from my subscribers, which I consider to be quite good in terms of the content I am producing. So I'm happy about that. But the number could be even higher. And it's not necessarily for the purposes of monetization that I would like to do this, but YouTube has a tendency to lock quite a few features behind subscriber counts, things like the community tab and other such features. So getting that count up a bit higher will give me a bit more means of communicating and expression. Yes, I see it's Dee's theme in the chat. Yes, I'm trying to reclaim the real one. With that, I think we'll just go into the main event. What I wish to talk about today is the author, writer, maybe philosopher, maybe some would call him, Knut Hamsun. Knut is a hard name to pronounce in English. It's a very Scandinavian name. And so I'll probably just refer to him as Hamsun from here on out. I wish to provide sort of an introduction to his life, his works, and I want to read from some of his articles later on. And I'm thinking I'll go for maybe 1.5, 2 hours, and we'll see how far we get. Is there anything else we need to mention? Right. I have the chat up on the side. So if there's any questions during, you can just ask away, and I'll do my best to answer them. I'm sure if you have any light to shed on what we're talking about, there might be something I've missed in my research. So feel free to share any knowledge you might have. Okay. So as a general introduction, I want to introduce Hamsun as one of the most influential authors when it comes to writing style in the 20th century. A lot of later authors say that he represents the origin of sort of the modern way of writing a novel, with the sort of the inner life and the thoughts of the characters provided as part of the story. And he spent about 70 years writing, and he wrote everything you can imagine, pretty much. He wrote poems, novellas, he wrote a bunch of articles and letters where he debated with other figures of his time. And he also wrote a couple of plays. I have not seen or looked into any of his plays. They're not very well known, so I'm sure there might be something in there, but I haven't looked into it. So, as I mentioned, the way he portrayed characters' internal monologue in his stories and his books. Hang on a minute. Sorry, had a cough. Uh, is counted as his most important contribution to the literary world. Um, People like Franz Kafka, Ernest Hemingway, Albert Einstein, he's been likened to Dostoevsky. All of these people have mentioned him as one of their influences, if not the chief influences, when it comes to writing style. So he's a bit of a sort of like a rogue shadow element in the literary world. He has affected a lot of people, and reading his books, it's very interesting because he's writing sort of proto-modernism. He's writing in a style that, if you read any books from our time, it's very you expect it to be written like this, but he's sort of the first one to do it. So you can see where he struggles, and you can see where he figures out how to do things in a way that makes sense for the reader. In his political life, Hamsun was characterized as an anarchist in his youth, but he moved quite quickly to a conservative and reactionary ideology in his later years. From my readings, when I say anarchism, I'm not necessarily comfortable in characterizing that as something left-wing, although you can certainly see it that way. It might also be that he remained slightly anarchistic in his whole life, in the sense that throughout his works he has a tendency to revolt sort of against the modern world as a whole. He's anarchist in the return to monkey way, very much so. Oh yes, he's very handsome. I have some I have some photos we'll look at later. So he moved to a conservative and reactionary ideology in his latest years. His biggest controversy was his open allegiance towards the mid-century Germans during World War II, and he was a card-carrying member of the Norwegian. Can I say this word on YouTube? The mid-century German party in Norway. Let's put it that way. And that's also part of why I don't want to go into this very much during this stream, because my channel is young and I don't want to get it nuked just just because of this live stream. And it's also something that I don't think is very relevant to his thoughts, at least the things we're going to be reading. It is something he himself seemed to have regretted. Some of it seems to have been attributed to an onsetting Alzheimer's, or just a feeble mind in his old age. But it's hard to know which is which. And a bit more on the anarchism versus reactionary stuff. No, I already mentioned this. He stands firm against modern society. He is very against democratic ideals, and he advocated for stronger patriarchal traditions. And then we'll get into a little bit his most famous books. And it is important to remember first that Hamsun is he's not a philosophical writer in the traditional sense. He's not like Evola, like I've covered earlier on my channel, who writes political and philosophical commentary on society. Hamsun expresses his thoughts through novels and poems, and is very much a poet. And from his writing, I think, I don't remember where I heard it, but I remember someone talking about how in a lot of Eastern European countries and in Russia, which is partly why Dostoevsky is such a hailed character in many senses. The poet, the writer, is oftentimes attributed more truth than anyone else. A writer speaking from his heart usually hits on something correct. And Hamsun, I think, sees himself very much as that kind of character. He didn't have very much education, and he did a lot of odd jobs throughout his life. I think, if I remember correctly, he at some point was sent to live with his uncle and hated it, so he ran away from home at the age of 14. And from there on out, it was most likely odd jobs and writing that sustained him. So he sees himself very much as sort of like, I think he hits on things through his writing and not necessarily through research or thinking. It's through artistic expression, and you see this a lot with artists. They'll intuit something philosophically true that they can't express in necessarily normal terms or words. Something that comes to mind is an old, I think it's a Deepest Lore stream that Academic Agent did, which covered, and I went back and watched the episode from the BBC as well, which covers Johnny Rotten of the Sex Pistols touring London and talking about how shit everything is, without necessarily having the vocabulary to explain why or how, but he could feel it and he could sort of express it in his artistry. So the first of his two most known books is his breakout hit called Hunger in English. This describes the psychological internal state of a young author trying to scrape by, pretty much without any money or food, trying to avoid losing his mind and his pride. And this all takes place in the Norwegian capital of Christiania, which now is called Oslo. Although I would argue that the city could easily extend to sort of be like a representation of life in a lot of the modern metropolises at the time. Hamsun had, when he wrote this, he had already spent quite a lot of time in Copenhagen in Denmark, and quite a lot of time in around the Chicago area in the United States. So I think in the case of Hunger, this is sort of a man's battle against the modern city in a way. And I'm not going to go much more into that. It's not very relevant to what we're talking about right now, except it's the critique of modern life and how it makes things difficult for people. His other famous work, I'm just going to swap photo here, is Growth of the Soil. And this is the one that earned him a Nobel Prize in Literature in 1920. Funny enough, this Nobel Prize, the Nobel Prize in Literature, not the Peace Prize, that would be funny. He ended up donating this to the mid-century Germans as sort of a peace offering / fanboyism, I think, for the German people and the German spirit. He was very enamored with Germany as a young nation being willing and able to sort of take over the mantle after the British Empire. I'll talk a bit about that later. The book Growth of the Soil depicts the growth of a small society from a literal no man's land to a large farmstead with multiple families through the main character Isaac, I guess. And Isaac is pretty much we could call the man, the traditional man of nature. He he stakes a path out in the middle of nowhere, and he plows the land, and he settles there, and eventually the government comes and tells him that actually you need to pay for that land, and he doesn't quite understand because, I mean, I made the land. I did everything you see around here. It's mine. Fuck off. But of course, eventually he has to pay the tax man. And so the book in total sort of depicts a very much perfect, quote unquote, state of nature, with Isaac as the husband and his wife, and their goings on in the farm, and over time their gradual clashes and challenges as modern society encroaches more and more upon their life. And at some point, his wife gets sent to prison, and when she comes back, she's no longer awed by the things that her husband can do, because she has been sort of tainted by modernity, and everything is so much easier in the city, and why do we have to stay out here in the middle of nowhere, which is a key point of conflict later in the books. So in summary, Growth of the Soil is farming good, industrialism bad, with everything in between that. And I want to do a little just talk about his influences in terms of his life. Here's a photo of him when he is 12 years old, if I remember correctly. This is 2 years before he runs away from home and decides to become an author. It takes a bit more longer than that, but it's not long after he runs from home when he decides that writing is what he wants to do, even though he does odd jobs on the side. And he does odd jobs to save up money to travel to Copenhagen in Denmark, which at this point was a pretty large cultural capital. Denmark at this time was a bit of a kingdom or empire, so to speak, in the decline, kind of, but their cultural spirit and their cultural life was very much active in many parts of Europe, and a lot of big Scandinavian authors and big Scandinavian philosophers are from these periods. And so this was very much a right place to be if you wanted to be an up-and-coming author, also because this is where the largest publishers were housed in Scandinavia. If you wanted to do any bigger, you had to probably go to London or maybe to Germany. And in the early 1880s, after writing, I think, 1 or 2 books, or if it's 1 book and a couple of poems, which he got published and they didn't do very well, he decides to travel to America, to the United States. And he has 2 trips to the United States. One in I think it's the 1882, and then again in 1884 or something. And while he's over in America, he does all kinds of different things, as well as writing, of course. He's always writing. But he works he's a journalist at some point. He's a farmhand at some point. He is a literary lecturer at a university for a while. He's a secretary. But a lot of the time is spent working the fields, working the prairie. If there's any Americans in the chat, he mentions being in the Red River Valley, which I think is somewhere in the Middle America, doing farm work. I don't quite know where that is, but maybe you can help me pinpoint where he stayed then, because he mentions being in Chicago and he mentions Red River Valley as part of his journeys. While he was in America, he encountered Mark Twain, and he also read his books. And in general, Hamsun held the American writers at the time in low esteem. at the end of the 1800s. He didn't see American cultural life as anything worthwhile, really. Though he had a very high opinion of their work ethic. Um, but he saw them sort of like they're hard workers, but they can't really create art. But Mark Twain he saw as an exception, which is a funny human thing that the one guy you read you like, and the one guy you met you like, but everyone else is they suck. So, um, and as a result of these journeys to the Americas, he became very disillusioned with the fact that he saw that, or he thought that the country had betrayed its sort of original ideas of liberty, which is very interesting that you can encounter these thoughts about, America or the US becoming federalized and sort of starting to take shape in the form that we know it today, even though I would say that's an even more monstrous form. But you can already find that in the late 1800s. And I'm sure there's plenty of other writers that do that, but this was my first meeting with it. This is also where he gets his anarchism in the left-wing state, in the left-wing sense, his anti-establishment streak, if you will, after the Haymarket riots in Chicago, which at the time was a demonstration to cement 8-hour workdays, and it pretty much went to shit. There was fighting and gunshots and multiple killed. He also writes from his times in America that he really admires the American spirit, and the spirit of charity and helpfulness. How Americans are willing to drop everything they're doing in order to help out their neighbor. If he mentions an event where a farmhouse burned down and the other neighboring farms all pitched in and helped build a new one so that the workers like him could continue the harvest, and how Americans are very glad to give donations. How he himself got help from one of the industrialists. Hang on. Industrialist. I'll find the name of this guy. See if I can find where I read this. Let's see here. This is not very relevant, so if I can't find it, I'll just keep on going. It was not Carnegie. Whatever. We'll probably get to it later. But the charity that the Americans showed to each other was something he brought up time and time again. And this might be interesting to think about these days with the Rittenhouse verdict and what sort of led to this trial in the first place. It's not exactly love thy neighbor stuff, is it? As the way he puts it here. And returning from the United States, he did write a book on his travels and his views on American life and art. He was then criticized for his radical views, and he was called a leftist and an anarchist, which I find very funny, thinking about where he ends up. And one reviewer named him as open-minded and radical to the extreme, unquote. And I think that's something that characterizes him very well. In everything that he ended up doing, he ended up doing it in an extreme way very often, especially in his intellectual pursuits. And some characterized him as some, and I don't know what this means, but I feel like this is I couldn't not mention this. Someone characterized him as an anarcho aristocrat, which I tried looking up or thinking about what that could mean, but I haven't been able to piece it together. Maybe I'm stupid, but anarcho aristocrat sounds very based. If anyone in the chat might know what that hints to, feel free to comment. And I'll show you some photos of how he looked during this time. I like this one very much. Let's see if we can zoom to fit. There's something about the cape and the gloves and the whole ensemble that really makes this picture, I think. And I think this is after his return from America. He's back in I think he's back in Denmark at this point. And the other one is this photo here. Sorry. Is that it? Am I locked in a view actual size? Okay, there it is. This is one where he worked as a train conductor in Chicago, I think, which is also a rather dapper suit and hat. I thought was interesting. And now we'll get into some of his politics, and we'll do some reading. Before that, I'll show you another photo from later in life. This is probably, if you've ever seen photos of him, this is probably what you've seen. I also like this one quite a lot. I remember from my research into Julius Evola, he has one of those stoic photos, and yes, he did Romantic Innkeeper, but that's not something I want to go into here. But he does. So I'm not sure if it's something he did, in sort of like a I am based way, or if he did it as sort of. He's very much a man of his time in his writings and his lack of filter, and it's hard to see that. He's obviously a very smart man, but he's not a learned man as many of his contemporaries. He didn't go to universities. He didn't have any formal higher education. And it seems that he sort of like intuits his way into this. And he has a very sort of populist way of writing, which can be quite fun at times. I have done some translations, which we're going to read from. And I'm not sure if it's something that I managed to get across. It's difficult to translate such flowery language from one language to another in short span of time, but hopefully I managed to keep some of it. Right, Romantic Innkeeper. That's a correct way of putting it. It's very reading his books is a very good way of cementing sort of the old way of thinking, the pre-modern way of thinking, and it is part of my sort of journey to read as many books as possible from before 1945, because it's from a different world, quite so. All right. So let's go into a bit of politics. I'll keep this up for a bit more because I think this is a nice photo. And from early in his life, he nurtured sort of a negative view of the British Empire. And all sources you find will point this toward fishing disputes along the coastlines of Norway. Norway at this time. We think about Norway right now. If you heard about Norway in the international sense, you probably just know that we stumbled on some oil and now we're the happiest nation on earth, pretty much. And and fishing before that was the way we lived, at least a lot of us, so Britain fighting with Norwegians over fishing areas and fishing rights was something that angered a lot of Norwegians, and also Hamsun, of course. And then when the Boer War occurred, this sort of cemented this feeling that, all right, Britain is a dying empire. They're just trying to desperately hold on to their assets, and it's just a question of time before it all falls apart. If you add to this that his books were very well liked in Germany, and Germany was an important cultural and intellectual giant on the continent at this point, or I should say, a lot of German centric cities, Vienna, etc., were also large cultural capitals with a lot of, and I mean a lot, of large cultural figures throughout the 1800s and early 1900s came from these countries and these areas. And so him doing well there was another gold star in his book. So coupled with his negative experiences with Britain, I think he sort of embraced Germany as the hot new thing, where Germany is the new up and coming nation. They have the fires of youth, and they're onto something here, and the empire that is going to come out of Germany, which I think was a very common thought at the time. I think a lot of people saw Germany as sort of the new guy on the block. This one's gonna be big, and it was pretty much overnight when it was formed. And so it wasn't an uncommon view. Thank you, Der Bücherwurm. I think I said that correctly. I don't know what it means. My 9th grade German fails me. And the earliest directly reactionary writings I can find from Hamsun is in 1889, which is quite early in his literary career. This is a few years after he returns from the US. And it's an article I found where he writes on the career of another person, one Swede with the name of August Strindberg. And August Strindberg was a Swedish polymath, meaning he wrote philosophical texts, he did art, he did plays, he did it all. And he is very much a character in his own right that, we should probably do a stream on if I ever get the interest in him, but he seems a bit too eccentric for my tastes. But he recounts in this article a lot of Strindberg's political positions and his works. He does this sort of like as a tribute to Strindberg, but there's a fine line in everything he writes where in the beginning he will write something that Strindberg did, and then he'll sort of transition into something that sounds like his own opinions. So it seems that he very much agrees with a lot of what Strindberg says. And some of this gets quite spicy. So I want to read from this because it contains a lot of unfiltered and raw sort of early reactionary thoughts. I think that in the grander scheme of reactionary thought, maybe this is in the middle of it, but it's fun having read someone like Evola, where the thoughts have had time to sort of cement, and they're very crisp. And here they're more sort of, you're reacting in the real sense of the word. And the first, Germanics are heavy in this stream. Swamp Germans present. Yes. This is a very Eurocentric stream. I would like to have some Americans on because I want to read from his American papers at some point, but maybe I'll save that for something else. So the first one I want to show and read from is when he talks about his and Strindberg's views on science. And I'm trying something new here, so hopefully this will work. I'll share my screen. Let's see, stop screen share, start screen share. All right, hopefully you can all see that. And this is my translation, so if some of you have the original text and feel like I did a bad job, I apologize. I'm not a professional translator. I've done my best to keep the essence correct, even if keeping a lot of the words correct is a bit difficult. Hamsun in these articles tends to write in what I could call the old way of writing, a bit of linguistic history for those of you who are not Scandinavians. Norway was for a long time subjugated to Denmark, which led us to adopt their language at some point. So the written language in Norway became Danish. And at some point we broke from Denmark, but we kept the written language of Danish. And this also attributed to a lot of the cultural exchange between Norway and Denmark as well in this time. So all of his writings are in this old semi-Danish writing because he's writing in sort of the transition between what we have as a written language today and the Old Danish, which also doesn't help when I'm trying to translate this. All right, I'll start by reading the first paragraph. When religion became just a phrase and the Bible merely a book, man turned to worshipping science. And the wise men thought hard about many things. They put pins in insects and named countless stars. They traced life back to a single cell. While the scientist on state payroll shovels science dust into his brain, and the economist writes papers on overproduction, half of mankind starves in want of food. Strindberg laughs at the state of our society. He accuses the scientific snob of being a criminal that receives payment for wasting his time researching stars and northern lights, things that do not concern us. He writes articles on Assyrian clay pots and eats another man's bread in cold blood. And I think this, even though he's incorporating some Strindberg here, in many ways sums up a lot of the way Hamsun is a reactionary. Because he's not necessarily a reactionary in the spiritual sense, the way that someone like Evola is. He's very much a let's go back to farming, let's go back to nature kind of reactionary. He very much values primitivism and sort of the ability to feed yourself. And that's something you see time and time again as something that's important to him. And so these lines about eating other people's bread while getting paid to, look at stars is a damning sort of indictment of a lot of the foolishness that has been done in the name of science. And I'll keep going. It allowed for furious scientific monomaniacals to subvert our evolution with their laughable spread of pedantic mass knowledge, discovering an overlooked character on a scroll of papyrus, the meaning of a typo, a comma in an old dusty manuscript suddenly put all humans on edge. Could we afford 40 years of our life on philosophical history and another 10 to study Shakespeare's Henry VIII? And this is, a critique against the universities starting to slide, I guess, with more and more people spending their time engrossed in studies that doesn't really concern us. I'll keep reading. What did this lead to? It led to man, while scrambling to accumulate this mountain of data, expending more resources and energy that could possibly be gained by the knowledge harvested. We exchanged everything for nothing, except a rising sun. It has ruined people. Alexander von Humboldt could no longer retain the multiplication table, and the professor of astronomy at the University of Lund was unable to divide whole numbers. In the long run, all we have achieved is dulling our brains and ruining our senses. And I like this part here. We exchange everything for nothing except a rising sun, pretty much because I've been getting into reign of quantity and these kind of thoughts, and I think this is very much like you know this is Knut identifying the rise of the merchant class in our society. It is the accountants ordering scientific discovery, sort of. And this is, in many sense, just a very basic reactionary take on science in the modern age, at least for someone who has read later reactionary writers like Julius Evola. But it's important to remember that this was written by Strindberg earlier and Hamsun already in 1889, quite a bit before many of the others, or it's hard to say where it originates first, but there's something interesting about sort of the roughness of the argument, I guess. And now I'm going to try to pull up Strindberg and Hamsun writing on women, and this is where we're going to get into some of the fun stuff. If anyone is there a publisher English translation of this? I haven't found any. The only thing I found a book of his collected articles from 1889 to 1928, and it's printed in, I think it was in the late 60s, early 70s, and I had to get it used. And I don't think it's been printed ever since, mostly on account of his relation with the mid-century Germans. And I will say, before reading anything on women, that I disavow these views. These are not my views. We're purely reading for the purpose of education. And I've tried to even cut out some of the spicier stuff to protect myself. Let's see here. And copy in some text. See if this updates our view. Lucky it will. This is my first time doing any streaming, and I'm trying to do some other tooling alongside it, which is probably not smart. See if we can force this into. Here we go. Okay. See if I have the correct start. Okay. I'm cutting out quite a bit when I'm reading these, because he's writing sort of a bit here and there, and I'm trying to sort of compile it to coherent structures in between the lines. And sometimes he'll go off on a paragraph that I don't feel is very relevant to what he's actually trying to say. So that's why there's a lot of these, just in case you find them, find the quotes themselves at some point. But hopefully I've managed to keep the essence. I'll see if I can find any English translations of this, and if there aren't any, I'll try to find some way of at least getting my translations out there, so you have something, if that's something you want. All right, let's read on women. If man has become weaker, inferior, and less resistant under the influence of culture, if his useless study of insects has ruined his eyes and filled his brain with dust, should the woman not be spared the same fate? The modern woman would know what Cicero thought of Sulla, and if Homer is a man or a myth. For what purpose? She is taught to conjugate verbs in a dead language, separate the periods in the history of our planet, create deep and complex studies on the tail of a fish. All the while, she grows ever more unfit to bear healthy, beautiful children. Let the woman care for what she was educated by nature to care for, and keep her away from such scientific uselessness. Again, disavow, just in case. But it is a furthering of his primitivist slant here, just sort of extended to the woman, saying that the role of a woman is even less so to be doing these things than the man. Woman was originally not a handmaid, which people are wont to tell us, but a mistress. Through her matriarchy, she had many an opportunity to prove her worth, which she did. She maintained the property, she held the right for inheritances, and she allowed the man to pay for crimes she herself had committed. Meanwhile, the man has doted, shielded, and cared for her, taught her not to endure hard work, excluded her from the hardest efforts, lifted her up to the status of his equal, a position she was never worthy of. And yeah, this is probably some of the more spicy stuff here. There is more, but I'm not sure if I'm going to include it. But I like this one because this is also part of sort of the old mode of thought, which is the when you talk to people, and if you ever casually mention or someone is talking about how women would get the bad end of a marriage, and you mentioned that in most European countries throughout a lot of history, a man would often have to pay for the crimes, either going to jail or actually paying in the place of his wife, and that the union is more of a actual union. It's two becoming one entity than it is the woman being subjugated by the man. This is mentioning these things is very difficult, right? Because it requires you to be outside, to use a phrase, the truth regime that most of us live in today. You have to inhabit a wholly different mode of thought. But looking at it through this lens, a lot of it makes sense. It's not about women shouldn't do this and women shouldn't do that. It's more about men and women have different roles metaphysically, and trying to cross the streams on that should only lead to difficulties, which, I mean, I think we're experiencing some of that now. I'm not sure what the solution is, but I don't think it's an unfair criticism. All right, let's keep going. Oh yeah, also he has a quote in here from Strindberg, which I'm not going to pull up, but it mentions at some point women being unquote unrealized men with breasts, and something more that borders on phrenology. And again, I don't want to get my channel nuked, so I'm sorry. We'll try to copy in some more text. We'll keep going. Post. Guess I can see the based in the chat. There's a lot of these when you read them and you're like, wow. again. We'll have to improve my... Nope, this did not work well. Maybe I'll have to pull up something else too. Oh, there it is. I got a few paragraphs from the other one, but this is the last one. Thus the woman rebels and shouts to the heavens of her oppression. Throughout history, she has held many lofty positions. As chief, general, and bishop, she has been an empress without even knowing the law of the lands she governed, and at times even without having visited them. This one is a bit interesting because this is where I think Hamsun would, in a sense, stand opposed to a lot of the monarchists and the maybe the Italian elitists, because he's very at times critical of royalty, in the sense of, I think it's that he sees that he thinks that it's an outdated mode of government. Maybe I'm not sure, but he often, I've seen things that sort of hints towards this, but I don't want to put any words in his mouth without an actual quote. This one is specifically on women, and he might be borrowing from Strindberg here. But it also sort of feeds into his primitivist sort of anarchist type of view, where if it was up to him, I think we'd all just, fuck off into the forest and build our own farms and just figure it out. And in a sense, having watched lately, I've been watching a series on Radical Liberation's channel, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. If you're not, you should go watch it. It's very good economics. And he has done a series of videos with Ryan Turnipseed on critiques of democracy from libertarian point of view. And I think a lot of the primitivism has a tendency to overlap with these critiques, where if you leave people with Radical Liberation is the channel. People call him Radlib, I've heard. If you search on him, search for him on Twitter. If you search him on YouTube, you'll get him. Very good economics. Well, I say very good. He's one of the front runners probably in the field. But yeah, as I was saying, in sort of the primitivist and the libertarian critique of democracy is probably very similar, in that it pretty much says that if people are free to figure this stuff out on their own, and free to sort of, if they don't like something, they'll just move over there, and they'll move over here and create their own communities. They'll usually sort these things out. And I think that's something that Hamsun is sort of advocating for. And I think that's where the anarchism part comes from it. Nordanum. I read it as behind every great man is a great woman sort of thing, except as phrases as a criticism toward feminists and women in group. Yeah, I think that's it as well. And in this, more than any other passage, he quotes Strindberg more directly, which I think is sort of him trying to wash his hands a bit, because Strindberg was very misogynistic, while I think Hamsun was a bit more just traditionalist. But maybe I'm just playing defense for him. Now, what was I saying? I can't remember. All right, let's keep reading. She has been employed as abbess, i.e. a spiritual leader. I think he's talking about here any spiritual leader, but specifically abbess. She's been employed as abbess without having studied at any school. She enjoys the best lanes and pavements when walking the street. One takes off one's hat for her in the elevator. One offers her the seat on the tram. In the theater, the church, or the concert hall, she has her hat on, while the man, attentive enough to remove it, allows this under the authority of her inferior and separate position. Again, spicy. What does the woman do in return? She laments her fate as the sole bearer of children and shouts to the heavens of oppression. And this is just sort of more of the same. It's the Knut Ledin stream, yes. There's 3 of them, I think, so far. Regarding the "behind every great man is a great woman" quote, I like a quote from, is it from the play by Henrik Ibsen, Per Gynt? He has a quote saying he was too powerful or he was too strong. There were women standing behind him. And in one sense, I think that could be read as, the behind every great man is a great woman, making the man himself stronger. But I think it could also be read as sort of like a societal commentary, in the sense that in the political sphere, if you can get the women in a democracy, you are able to amass quite a bit of power in something like, let's say, banning alcohol. You need the middle class white women to get up in arms about something in a democracy, right? If you want to really change things. All right. Next, we'll go into reactionary thoughts, but I'm just going to go and get some water because I'm going to need it if we're going to keep reading. So I'll be right back. And we're back. I'll do a brief pause while I set up some more of the text here. Women are the moral and oh, cool. Wow, we're learning, boys. I can highlight comments. Okay. They traditionally raised the young children. After all, the Inquisition had no fury. Right. And I think in a sense, if we're talking purely tactics from a valueless interpretation, as I hear academic agents say quite a lot, I think if you want to change society, you should certainly try to convince the women first, and use them to enshrine laws that help you out. And speaking of laws, let's do current events for a moment. Derbishuvim, I'm not sure what you mean about his other views and books, but we've gone for about an hour now talking about some of his views and some of his books. But we're reading from articles he has written. This is not from his books. But yes, I was going to say, speaking of law and current events, I saw a lot of people having a go on Twitter and in the live streams. I haven't been able to get this all to seeing all of it. I've been a bit busy, but it's been a lot of talk about if the Kyle Rittenhouse trial is actually a win or not. And I think it certainly is. And I think we should allow ourselves to the articles. Yeah, I'll talk about that in a moment. I'll just indulge myself with current events for a second. I think it's certainly a win, and I think it's okay to celebrate because I don't think that letting your morality be at 0 out of 100 all the time, it's not going to change anything. You need to keep the morale up in the long run. This is a marathon and not a sprint, right? And I think in the end, the real tragedy here is that it happened in the first place. The real tragedy is that, and the real tragedy in this is that a 17-year-old boy, because that's what he is, and even though he's 18 now, but even in that courtroom when I saw them handing out the not guilty verdicts, and you can see him breaking down in tears in that moment, Kyle Rittenhouse you realize he's still just a boy who almost had his life ruined. And so the real tragedy here is that a boy of 17 was the one who had to defend his local community from roving bands of looters. It should be the bare minimum. And it's a good gauge of where we're at. We can say that, okay, things aren't as bad as we thought. They could be worse, but now we have a sort of like a now we have sort of like a way of gauging where we're at. We have discovered that actually there's a lot of I think this was mentioned on the stream. I see there's some chat about that Prudential list had. I haven't seen all of it. I just caught like 20 minutes of it last night before I had to go to bed. But there was some talk about, there's suddenly all of these based lawyers out there. Maybe we can get them on board to do something. In general, I think picking up the W's along the road is important. But it's also important to remember what the goal is, or at least where we're headed. And it's we're far from finished if we want to reach anything good. I don't think you've mentioned where they were published. Mongolian Doggerland, are you talking about the articles? Because I have a list of where the articles were published, but they were published in a bunch of different newspapers, I think. I have a list at the back of the book here. Let's see here. A lot of these were printed in the Evening Post, which is Aftenposten in Norwegian. The article I read from where he talks about Strindberg is picked out from a book called A Book About Strindberg, which was published in Karlstad in 1894. It says that most of Hamsun's writings on Strindberg probably stems from articles that Strindberg wrote in other papers, in Norwegian papers, and I don't have the exact ones here. So a book about Strindberg, which is probably a lot of different authors, writing about Strindberg. The second one I have made, or I have translated, sorry, is called Festina Lente, after the Latin proverb that Augustus used. And that came out in the Evening Post, Aftenposten in Norwegian, the 12th of December 1928. And I'm sure if you Google Festina Lente Hamsun, you will find something at least. That's a good question, Mongolian Dogland. I'm not sure of the timeline on this. Let me do a quick Google. Let's see. I'll find a Wikipedia article. Okay, that's not been. I'm not sure, Mongolian. I think they were, and in a sense they still are, like in the modern sense. They're still a quote unquote conservative paper, but I mean, what does that even mean these days, right? From what I read in it, they're not at all. I may be on fire, but at least my knee doesn't itch anymore. That's a good description of it. And I do agree that, you know, I think we can all agree that we'd rather not be on fire, but we can't just do that. We can't just fire extinguish ourselves because we don't have one. So we're just gonna have to, you know, at the end of the day, we're all human. And I think allowing yourself to be permanently black-pilled is probably just gonna paralyze you. It's more about identifying where and what actions you can perform, and in sort of the Evolian sense, it's more about being ready for the time when it comes, and making sure that you're a man among the ruins. So I still think that it's when bigger things happen simultaneously, like the Australian. Yeah, and it's like the world is going to hell everywhere else, but at least in this one instance, something went right. And not only that, I think the big win is actually the as was mentioned, the sort of the discovery of the base lawyers that are out there, regardless of if it's going to be a lot of cooperation between dissident right wings or right wing lawyers, but at least it's nice knowing they're out there, and it's something that can be built on, and that's something that's, and it was talked a bit about. I'm sure they talked more on it. You guys can probably tell me in the Prudentialist stream about building the institutions and starting to build communities for the future. And you know, my stuff is very young, of course. I don't have many viewers, I don't have many videos, but I hope that my contribution can be helping other young men like myself sort of become strong sort of family men or independent people, to the point that we're ready and we're able to contribute when it needs to. and hopefully I'll be able to do that myself along the way. So yeah, that was probably a bit too much current events. Um, isn't this supposed to be cigar stream light? We don't talk about that stuff here. We're going to talk about based reactionary thoughts. And this is just a few general reactionary things he writes in the same essay about Strindberg. Let's see here. I'm going to have to copy over my text again. And it's, you know, it's one of those things where I know I made my first video on sort of with a negative slant towards Jordan Peterson, and I'm sure that's a whole discussion in its own right. But I still think that, you know, striving for excellence and striving for competence and striving for being a man, quote unquote. I can say this very easily because I know from YouTube analytics that I have 100% male viewership, so I can talk to you. It's just us boys in here, um, and uh, these things I feel as time has passed and the world becomes even more crazy. These things are to some extent inherently right wing, and that's not necessarily a new idea, uh, but it does reflect on sort of the if you start with yourself and your local community, you're going to be amazed at how much you can actually change the world through that, and striving to be, at least if you appear to have your shit together, it's actually going to influence other people, as I talked about in my first video. The cleaning your room does not make you a king. The being the virtuous man as much as you can uh, will create sort of this gravitational center for other people who aren't virtuous to pull towards you and want to have you in their life, and want to be better because of that. And in that sense, I think instilling these thoughts into men is important. And in that sense, I'm thankful to Peterson, because I don't think this would have happened if I hadn't watched his lectures. I think everything went a bit off the rails, as it often does when he becomes too popular. Most things do. But are you registered as a woman? Well, it might be updated now, but last I checked, it was 100% men. All right. Well, I wanted to say one more thing on the whole Peterson thing. The point is, in terms of the excellence is in that sense inherently right wing, and that's why I think you see the entropy of excellence in a lot of culture, a lot of products, a lot of institutions. There's the saying of any institution not explicitly right wing will become left wing. And I think I would add on to that, and then it will start to suck, or become tyrannical. I joked with my wife a week ago or something. She told me that she'd gotten like an ad where a company, I think they make like outdoor wear, and they had like an ad where they were pro trans. And I told her joking, like, "Oh shit, I like those jackets. I'm sad that they suck now, because it's gonna happen if you allowed this stuff to seep into uh, your uh, your organization. It's gonna tear away at the fabric. It's like having, is it termites? They're gonna chew at your foundations, and eventually the house is going to collapse. It might start in the small parts, but once the culture in the company has changed, the product's eventually going to be shit. you know. All right. That was a bit of a side step. Let's go back to looking at some reactionary stuff. All right. And these are just some general reactionary things. I don't think there's anything new, but maybe it's worded in a funny way. Despite the furious... Oh, sorry, I'm not sharing my screen. One moment. Here we go. Despite the furious efforts of all conscious humans since the dawn of time, we have yet to do progress any favors. Looking at life and the march of history, you will find clear circles and repetitions of delusions. The man of today dreams of a republic, which the Greeks and the Romans possessed 2,000 years ago. The man of today dreams of a republic, which the Greeks and the Romans possessed 2,000 years ago. The culture of the Egyptians, which in many ways surpassed ours, decayed as soon as one saw through its nothingness. The transformism seen in our mechanical progress is hailed as progress towards betterment, towards human happiness. Is this not but a leftover scrap and a transformed God's plan? Or could one hazard that the mechanical, blindly ruling laws of nature labor uninterrupted and without any concern of the happiness of human society when they conjure ice ages, floods, or volcanic eruptions? There's a few lines in the middle of these two about Asia being a sleeping giant on the world stage that one day is going to wake up and probably conquer everything, which I noted to myself because it's humorously prophetic, I think. And on the last one, where he talks about the mechanical, blindly ruling laws of nature that labor uninterrupted without any concern of the happiness of human society, and he mentions ice ages, floods, volcanic eruptions. In a sense, you could add pandemics to this, to have a parallel to our time. It's our own hubris to think that we have the power to contain natural processes. And I think in Hamsun's view, eventually it's going to lead to our downfall. Now, we can notice too, I know that Curtis Yarvin, in his clear peeling essays, or I think it's the Gray Mirror essays, he writes that we have set up institutions that benefit from making problems out of things and messing with these things. The way he uses it with COVID is he talks about virologists that want to change the world because they're intellectuals, right? They want to change the world. They want the ability to change something and have the power to do something. And so they set up a virologist lab and they tell the government, well, the swine flu was pretty bad, so we should probably set up a lab and study these things. And so they do, and eventually one of them escapes from a lab in Wuhan, and here we go, right? And so if we hadn't done that in the first place, would we be here now? It's our own hubris that has led us to be in this position, and it is our own hubris, supposedly, that we can control it and that it should be able to lead us out. All right. Have mankind subjected the laws of nature and rules them to the benefit of society? Are we able to regulate the tilt of our planet's axes, create exceptions in climates, and stop ruined crops in Russia? Have we been able to, at the height of our science, exterminate the phylloxera in Hungary, France, and Italy? Phylloxera is... I'm not native English, so I didn't know this, so I had to Google it. Phylloxera is small, tiny lice that attack the roots of wine stalks. So, if you know anyone that does a winery, they probably complained at some point. I'm not sure if that's still a problem, if we have it under control. I think we managed to breed us out of that problem, meaning that we managed to cross enough wine stocks to be able to avoid phylloxera. But I think the critique still stands here that, expecting us to be able to control the world at our whims is hubris. How many of the natural laws have man actually conquered? He might use some of these laws in his service, which is something any animal does. The bird flies with the wind when it wants to go faster. The beaver understands how to use the pressure of the streams to fortify the clay in his dam. And again, we can do a lot of things, but the critique here is, can we do anything? Can we do everything? Should we do everything? Eventually, it's probably just going to lead to a Jurassic Park situation or something, right? To use hip movie references. And that concludes my readings on this article, which he talks about Strindberg. I have translated the Festina Lente article, in which he talks a bit about Americanisms and how it's important that we should take time to live. If you want me to read some of that, I'd be happy to do that. The Dutch used live rounds on protesters. Oh yeah, there was a thing in the Netherlands last night. I'm not sure what that was about. Someone got shot because they were protesting lockdowns or something else. You can have some more rank punditry, as they like to say, while I pull up the other article. Rotterdam, and it was actual like anti-lockdown protests. I can just I can Google this. I don't have to bother to chat with this. All right, here's the article. Let's see. Share my screen. This is a pretty long article, and I'm not sure if I'm going to read all of it or if we're just going to speed through some of it. It's not necessarily a very deep article in the sense that we're going to learn big truths about life here, but it's quite funny to see his perspective on America and the world. This is written in 1920. And so this is after World War One. This is this is in 1928. Sorry, so this is after World War One. This is with Germany sort of kind of on the rise, and this is 8 years after he received his Nobel Prize in Literature. From people across Europe and at times from America as well, I have received requests for producing some striking thoughts, a concentrated word of wisdom that they may live on in the future. And every time I have thought, these people must have gotten the idea that I'm a wise man. I cannot hide it any longer. I have been discovered. I think this is a bit of a joke. Again, he didn't have any formal education, so he sees himself pretty much. He sees himself, I think, as sort of this peasant who just happens to know how to write. I think, and and it's a bit of a funny image to have. I understand that I am but one of many that receive such requests. They learn from world teachers like Kant, Goethe, Darwin, Tolstoy, and when there are no more prophets of great stature among us, they seek the smaller ones. There were many of those, 12 to be exact. Here I think it's a reference to the disciples of Jesus. But to arrive at my doorstep, me who don't even know how to be comfortable with life's answers and have to ask the sea, the wind, and the stars every day. There have been others in our time that have enacted great works and invented the greatest serums. Bergson launched the intuition, Einstein the theory of relativity. I am a blank slate. I have no prerequisites. I know nothing, haven't even finished school. And here I wander, a peasant on my soil, an innocent abroad, and that's actually the word he uses. He writes in English here. A striking thought, a word of wisdom to live by. The olden times had Augustus's language of choice, festina lente. And festina lente roughly translates to something like hurry up slowly, something like that. Basically, um, you shouldn't be lazy, but you should make sure that you don't work yourself, or you don't hurry so much that you're making errors, or you can use it in a lot of contexts. I like my personal modern version of Festina Lente is from the hit movie Shooter, which I think has a TV series now, in which the sniper man tells the guy he's training that slow is smooth, smooth is fast. That's my interpretation of it. All these requests point decisively at one thing: the bewildered confusion in mankind. Everyone searches, no one knows peace. God is forgotten. The dollar seems unable to replace him, and machinery soothes no weary soul. The road is closed. Under these circumstances, America seems only to be accelerating. And remember, this is 1928 America, not 1884 America that Hamsun used to know. America refuses to let itself be slowed down by any obstacle. It wants to force its way forward. America turning around? Nonsense. It accelerates 100 times faster. It becomes a hurricane on our globe, and it makes life white hot. In Europe, we use the word Americanism. The olden times had festina lente. So here's him becoming sort of wary of what America have become. I think there's a bit of a falling out, in a sense, with between him and America, as a concept, between his travels there and what happened in World War One. And of course, after World War One, America was increasingly taking a larger and larger space on the world stage. Misusing power is no show of power. At times, using power is not a show of power either. Power itself wears out, and one day one is required to draw from your reserves. Old peoples like the Assyrians and the Babylonians used their powers, and they abused their powers, and they perished. The Orientals appear to me as large in ethical wisdom. From olden times, they were the keepers of satisfaction in life. They smiled at the Occidental, the Western, restless attitude, and bowed their heads with a contemplative calm. They had enough on their own plate. And so here he goes back to this Asian notion that he sometimes touches on. I think this has something to do. He had a few travels to Turkey and slightly further east. I haven't found anything saying that he really traveled any further east than that. So I guess he's just a confirmed weeb in that sense. I think he sees that their respect for time is something that we have lost in the West. I think that's what it comes down to. And in this essay, or in this article, it boils down to this paragraph. A paper I read recently contained a story of an aeroplane that crashed in the desert. The native peoples from the Sistiokbad oasis, who had seen the large bird in the skies and arrived at the site, looked at the machine, thought nothing of it, shook their head, but remained quiet. The bird was dead. The bird had never even been alive. The pilots had hoped for a different reception. An immeasurable astonishment, the locals kneeling in reverence to the invention. And no such thing happened. The pilots made themselves interesting. They explained how many hours they had been in the air and how many hours they had left. Now they were going to fix the bird and fly onwards. The Tuareg exchanged a few polite words, greeted the pilots, and wanted to remove themselves. This did not sit well with the pilots, as they wanted to see the wild ones kneeling and hear their outbursts. They wanted to tame these sons of the desert. The sheik then expressed his doubts if the invention, the journey, the very idea itself was worth the cost of human soul that was expended in the business. I think this is a very beautiful sentence in a way. Yeah, but why? And sort of, I think this is the modern mind meeting the ancient mind, in a sense. And the modern mind doesn't really have an answer to this. We flew across the desert, and the chieftain asks, why? What do you answer? Well, because I could, because we tried, we wanted to, right? And this is what he talks about with the Westerners not being able to be content with life as it is. And I think that's a dangerous sort of like two-edged sword. Is that what you say? When it's like, on the one hand, it drives us to, or has driven us to do a lot of good and invent a lot of good things, but it also leads us to maybe overwork ourselves or do things that we shouldn't just because we can. That's a Jurassic Park reference too. Wow, I'm just full of them. The scientists were too busy trying to think if they could. They failed to realize if they should, something like that. Moderns, absolutely, yeah, they're on life watch. Modern bros, BTFO. All right. Naturally, his words fell on deaf ears in the case of the pilots. He was but a voice in the desert. But merely 2 generations ago, John Stuart Mill wrote that it remained to be seen if our large mechanical inventions had actually lightened the load of life for any human. What will John Stuart Mill say now? This is also very funny. Me as sort of like a coming at this as a libertarian, so to speak, originally. I've always been double-edged, right? Thank you. I've always been into economics, so my journey into politics has been through economics, and very much adopting the Austrian school early on. I haven't done much economic work outside of university, but I had a few classes there, and I had quite a few classes in high school, and I was very much on the libertarian side of the economic spectrum, and the Austrian side. And so I got into people like John Stuart Mill, John Locke, these old classical liberals. And it is very clear to me now, after having read the Reactionaries and going back and reading these more thoroughly, that they're writing from a totally different mindset than I'm reading from. And it's the ancient versus modern worldview clashing. And they're definitely writing all of their libertarian thoughts from within a strong moral framework and a moral society in the case of Christianity. And I think, going back, I'm sure that probably goes for everything, but if you could bring some of these people into the future, they'd probably go, well, that's not what we meant. You have to have the church. Why did you remove the church? Things like that. A sensational requirement for life on Earth. The Tuareg can live without it. We achieve records of flight, of racing, and fist fighting. We shout towards the heavens in delight at the heroes who fly over the Atlantic. and we return empty back home from our excitement. A French line dancer, Blondine, walked on stilts atop a line across the Niagara already in 1860. There is courage, personal effort, energy, ambition, sensation in such business, but there is no balance of our souls when we celebrate such dark nonsense, even if it is turned into a sacred deed. And so this sentence is quite interesting because I think he wrestles with the idea that, yeah, it's impressive that we can do these things. It's impressive that someone climbs the highest mountain, but shouldn't you rather be looking after your family, kind of thing. Um, uh, and again, going back to his primitivist roots here, where doing these things is foolish and a waste of time. I think we might show civilization, but we do not show culture. This is the case. We are to be civilized, then over civilized, but we lose out in spirit. And if that isn't a compilation of the past 150 years, I don't know what is. During boxing matches, we expose ourselves without shame as we, crazed and panicked, cheer for the fighter that can hurt his opponent the most. And so we over civilize ourselves, but we still do boxing matches so that we can, pretend to be human for a bit in the primal sense. When the bold, the foolhardy, the pilot Lindbergh returned from his flight across the Atlantic, American magazines wrote that he should be elected as the president of the Free States. The young man comes from an old and honorable people. He has himself reacted to and denied many foolish offers. He's popular. He knows his machine. His name is on everyone's lips. But a president of our world's largest and most powerful people, when such a thought can appear and be launched without apology, is that culture? And I get the feeling here that maybe Hamsun wouldn't have been a very big fan of Donald Trump. Uh, uh, I don't think he would rather the warrior archetype be the leader of a people. And I'm sure if I could find a source on it, or if I could ask him, he was probably a very big fan of someone like Teddy Roosevelt. But that's just my opinion. And here he's gonna launch into an attack on an American author. An American author living in New York recently wrote an article in the Danish paper The Politic about a royal visit in our old Norwegian city of Trondheim. He railed against the locals for being awed by such insignificant event as a visit from a king. And he might be somewhat correct. On the opposite side, I have experienced in the United States a much larger excitement during a presidential visit to a much smaller town than Trondheim, a town without its 1,000-year-old history. But this is immaterial. I will not dwell on this. On the other hand, the author also railed against the ordinary stature of the royal residence in Trondheim, the town's buildings in general, a question that the author had no authority to discuss. In Trondheim stands a wonderful Gothic cathedral, the largest in all of Scandinavia, a noble building that finds no match in America and never will. And I can actually, hang on, I'll finish this and we can have a look at the buildings. A noble building that finds no match in America and never will. And the royal residence? It is no skyscraper, but it is a large castle, the largest royally arranged wooden construction in the Nordic countries. This itself is noticeable, for it is built with trees that will last as long as any brick. So, briefly in this, I think this is Hamsun sort of striking back at the modern Americanisms, where some Harvard yuppie probably wrote about, oh, there's not even any brick buildings here. Why should we bother? So let's see if we can find the... Can I just share? No, I'm sharing the tab. Hang on. See if we can find some the Gothic cathedral in Norway, in Trondheim. Here we go. This one. And then there's the royal residence. Let's find one from Hamsun's time. This is from the 1880s to the 1890s. I don't know about that, Miss Mongolian. I would have to look into it, but I remember it happening. So that's a good question. Let's see. Can I open just the entire? Here we go. So here's the royal residence. This is probably a bit of a bad photo, but you can see it's a very. It looks like an old sort of. It actually looks kind of like the some of the old French manners. And it's not very tall, as he mentioned. There's no skyscraper. And here's the Gothic cathedral. And this is a very beautiful cathedral. And I'm just thinking here if I could find. Nope. Okay. And inside there's some even more beautiful carvings, and you really get the sense of you find certain ornaments and things that are small things that you can see someone probably spent years on, or at least a lot of years perfecting it. And again, this is the old world here. This is the old mindset. I don't remember who it was, but I saw a Twitter post a couple of days ago from someone in the right saying, why don't we build these kinds of cathedrals anymore? And I think that's part of it. I think it's, the world of today wouldn't be able to produce this. It's not that we can't do it physically. I just think that we wouldn't be able to produce this spiritually. And I think going back to this, that's something Hamsun is sort of agitating this American about, that it doesn't matter if you have skyscrapers, you'll never be able to build a cathedral. At least not in a physical sense. We can talk to Curtis Yarvin about the metaphorical sense of the cathedral. The American author is probably what one would call an educated man. He has studies at his country's excellent schools and acquired the correct knowledge of many areas of our time. He's a civilized person, and it does not appear to him that he might have missed anything in his education. But he lacks experience, a historical spirit, patina. He wrote that he never, I'm not sure if that's the English pronunciation of it. He wrote that he never entered the royal residence. He probably would never have had an interest in the contents. It lacks glimmer, but it is full of nobility. There exists a deep culture in the old wooden architecture of Trondheim. And here I think is some of what we talked about when he says culture. I think this is Hamsun as the artist sort of struggling to find the correct words to describe why we don't build cathedrals anymore, so to speak. Have I been railing at America, gone behind its back? I have not, and I have no reason to. Until the day I die, I will cherish everything I learned during my 2 journeys there, and I am not want for good memories either. I speak of the nation as a whole and the American lifestyle. I want to mention the large hospitality of the Americans, and here we get into what I talked about with their charity and stuff. Their empathy and generosity. I cannot measure or express correctly the magnitude of the donations that flow from a Rockefeller or a Carnegie or a Morgan. I speak of the helpfulness of the general American in everyday life. They are quick to action when needed and never ask about the profits of a good deed. I once asked for a few dollars in purchasing books for a small Norwegian colony near the town I worked in. It was magnificent. Dr. Booth offered himself as the first on my list, and from there flowed many more. I had to stop the collection myself. I once worked for a relatively poor Irish farmer whose farmhouse went up in flames. Neighbors flocked from near and far, not only to help put out the fire, they rebuilt the farmhouse. Us farm workers could keep on with our field work, and once the house was finished, thank them for the deed and move back in. And I know this is a bit of a romantic sort of view on it, but I mean, as long as I have lived, this America hasn't existed. And I mean, one thing is what you see on the news, but some people, I mean, the beauty of the internet is that most people nowadays just can walk around with a camera, and I'm not sure if this America exists. Maybe somewhere in the Midwest, and they just don't care about us, right? They're just living their life. I don't know if there's any Americans in the chat. Some water. People should look up a close-up of the gargoyles. Yeah. And, that pretty much goes for like everything on Gothic cathedrals. There's just so much detail and so much time spent on something that we would label insignificant, and that's part of the key, right? America's concept is gone. It's enclave America now. Yeah. American here, yeah. So, does this America exist anywhere anymore? Was it just a brief time when it was being populated? That's certainly a sad thought. You might forgive me for indulging in a related personal experience. As a young man, my journey had come to a halt, and I was stuck in Chicago without any funds to get out of town. I wrote then a short letter to a known American and asked for $25 that I couldn't guarantee I would be able to pay back. And this is $1882, I think. So I don't know what the inflation rate puts that on today. I delivered the letter myself. It was quite the journey, all the way out to the slaughterhouses, and I asked around to find the man's office. It was a colossal room, horrible to look at, almost like an outhouse, but with an incredible swarm of office workers. By the entrance, I found a young doorman, who took my letter and brought it to the center of the room. There, at an elevation, sat a man working with some papers. It was Philip R. Moore. He is the meat packing king or something he was called, like one of the big industrialists of the East Coast. From this moment on, I dared not to look up. I was ashamed, I suppose, scared too, for his denial was highly likely. The doorman hastily returned. I barely noticed him before he was in front of me with $25 in hand. I needed a moment to regain myself before stupidly asking, "Did I get them?" "Yes," the doorman smiled at me. "What did he say?" "Well, he told me your letter was worth it." I stood there for a bit and fiddled with the notes before asking, "Can I go up there and thank him?" The man answered with a doubtful tone, "Maybe, but that would probably just bother him." I looked up at Mr. Armour. He did not look back at me, continuing his paperwork. I do not remember what I wrote in that letter. It was probably the worst English Mr. Armour ever read, and that about it being worth $25 was probably him being ironic. One time, while I worked at the large Dalrymple farm in Red River Valley, I experienced something else. A section of his workers was to be transferred to a new area. On our way over there, one of the men got sick and had to be left behind in a small prairie town we were passing through. When we finished our work in the section during fall, and again passed through the town on our way back, the sick man had gotten better, my translation, though he was still weak and had no profits or money. While I was standing there chatting with him, a $5 note was placed in my hand. Soon after, I got a new $5 note, and more followed. It was aid for our sick comrade from our other workers. I witnessed and could add even more instances and traits of American charity. An American may be wealthy, but it follows that he must also be rich in his heart. And as the same charity and helpfulness is to be found in the average American, it is nothing less than a character trait of the nation. The sort of America does still exist on rural enclaves, but as the modern urban culture spreads with the help of electronic media and internet, is dying to cancer. Yeah, and that is probably something that's very real in a lot of countries. I feel very, very lucky, of course, on the physical plane to be born where I am, in terms of physical wealth and opportunity and all that things, but also in in the case of, I'm lucky. I'm merely a vassal state of the American Empire. We get to be left alone for the most part, but the culture eventually spreads here too. So I'm trying to be ahead of some of this, and I'm sure you're all aware. But there's another Norwegian in the circle named Guide to Culture, which is, I'll find his Twitter because he writes it in a funny way. Here it is. Probably streaming right now too. So while you're here, you should go look at him. No, I'm joking. Please stay here. Also subscribe. Yeah. Okay. So it's $677 today. Yeah. So this guy, Guide to Culture, very good. You should follow him on everything. He has more followers than me and everything. So you probably already know about him. And you should follow me on Twitter if you don't. I don't post a lot, but I do retweet things. And if you do, you'll get probably some updates on my videos. It should be Twitter/a walrus in a suit. Here we go. Yeah, so I'll post things like this if you're interested. If not, that's fine too. By the way, your first video was the next level. As a millennial, it resonated strongly with me as I experienced success with career, marriage, and family. I am too midwit to say anything more existential. Keep up the good work, sir. Thank you, Celis. Yeah, the reason I made that first video, and I wasn't necessarily trying to, and that was kind of the point too. I feel like I'm not alone in this journey. I feel like a lot of us have been lucky that we've been sort of jolted awake, and that it happened as early as it did for me was a blessing. And I'm not necessarily saying that I immediately have gotten based or anything, and I'm not saying that I am, but it was in sort of the personal space. It was realizing that actually, when I actually have to care about things, I actually have to decide if I want a family. I actually have to care if I want a kid. And meeting my wife, she likes to tell this story that on the first date, I told her straight up, I think this is something I learned from Stefan Molyneux. Don't hate me for mentioning him. But I told her straight away that, I want kids. If you don't, no hard feelings, but this isn't going to work. It wasn't the first thing I said to her, obviously, but it was part of our first date. My Twitter I'll just post it in the chat. Okay, let's keep going let's see if there's any more chats. $5 note is 135.58 pre-K card, yeah, right. But yeah, Celis, the point of this video was sort of to, a lot of the sphere around academic agent is, first of all, they're very well read, which is a good thing, and many of them are a bit older. And there's a few on the millennial side. I think people like Charlemagne and a lot of the what he calls the NRX kids are younger, but there's a journey here that a lot of the viewers and a lot of people in this community have been a part of, that I sort of wanted to touch on, I guess. It's hard to explain where it all comes from, but I'm happy that I'm doing this. It's really giving me a lot of drive, even just doing this live stream. All right, let's keep going for a bit. I witnessed and could have even more interest. No, I've read this. It is striking to us Europeans to see the blind, unwise hardness that is expressed in certain actions of the American state. I could mention the incredible walls of taxes against Europe, and I could mention the iron will when collecting Europe's war debt. And here's more anti-post World War One American thoughts here. And when you go back and look at the actual amount or the actual percentages of taxes and the actual amount of debts, I mean, there's no wonder there was a World War II eventually. God eggs, yeah. I will say, it's been a few years since I've seen, I mean, after he got yeeted off of YouTube, I don't think I've seen any Molyneux or heard any of him, which is kind of sad that I just, dropped him just because it's not on YouTube, but you know how it is. And it's not like I followed him religiously before that, but in a lot of his conversations, there is a lot of good, you can gather a lot of experience from just listening to what sort of weird shit these people do. And in that sense, Stefan is just there like a normal person for once, and saying, what the hell are you doing? If you want children, why aren't you trying to look for a man? And the woman will be like, what are you talking about? I'm trying to, things like that. And it helps you form sort of a very realistic view of how dating and how relationships can be. But beyond that, I don't know if there's any value in it. He certainly is an eccentric character, that's for sure. All right. As an everyman, a man on the streets, I reckon it like this. America profits the most in the moment from its financial politics, but in the future, and all the years that have yet to come, for all the generations to come, America, like any other nation, cannot stand alone. America is not the world. America is part of a world and has to live its life together with all the other parts. I mean, in this one, talk about things that aged poorly. I don't think he was ready for what America was going to do after World War II. But maybe we're about to see the end of that world soon. Who knows? If I had more space in this paper, that's a weird bug, I would have hazarded a few lines of common sense regarding the modern spiritual life of America. Its spirit today is heavens apart from what it was under my journeys to the States in the 1880s. It has always been large, made gigantic by its strong economy and the intellectual power of the nation. But it has in our times reached a height that is worthy of its great people. In branches of science, it should be regarded as an absolute leader. For good reasons, I cannot hold any other opinion in this than what little I have acquired through reading. I am just launching a regular European opinion. The art is high in the sky. The American visual art is rich and full of talent. Its literature is blooming. Specifically, the young novel literature from the States is the freshest and most original in the world. Truly refreshing and an example for Europe. This is very interesting because here he has done like a full 180 on what he thought after being there in the 1880s. Which speaks to how different I think 1880s America and 1920s America is. And it's just, it's nothing new. It's just, a lot happened in those, 40 years. Schopenhauer is not without his influence, neither is Nietzsche. But there are large independent intellectual workers in the American literature aside from its poets, for example, the pragmatic leader William James. And William James was the leader of pragmatism as a concept. If only I had more space, I would have written about the lovely children and the American women, the most beautiful type of woman on this earth. In my younger years, I saw quite a bit of the world. I have stood both in the land of the whites and the coloreds, but never have I met more a complete woman a complete womanly beauty than in the great cities of the American East. From face to body and every limb, in their performance, in their refinements, their charm, it contains for me a revelation of beauty. I say this as a general worker who never got a look into the world of the higher classes. There's a paragraph simping about American women. I don't, I haven't been able to glean anything more in that. I mean, he had two Norwegian wives, if I remember correctly. So it's, I guess he has the feel when no American GF, I guess. Just some water real quick. I was muted, I'm sorry. I want to use the space I have left for this column to respectfully recognize the United States for the teachings it has shown to the world in the glory and honor it brings to work. America works. America teaches the world to be diligent. I am not talking about the drive to break through with revolver in hand if need be. I am talking about the feverish work on the fields of gold or the shouting speculation at the stock exchange. I am talking about the average American that has received hands and a head suited for work and uses both all his life, but he uses it too hard. So again, here he probably has a lot of good feelings from his time in America, and I think that's the sort of a conflict in his primitivism, and that he loves the Americans for the the work they do, in the sense that they're very diligent uh, in that time period. Um, but he does not like the Americanisms, as he referred to earlier. And I mean, yeah, Nordan on how the turntables are spinning. Um, the Americanism that he talks about is certainly the thing that won over the diligent Protestant, hardworking American that just wants to be left alone, right? Or the feds, as economists would say. Nobody's too good to do anything in America, but the nation as a whole seems to work in a feverish tempo spurred by greed. I read in an autobiography of Henry Ford that he moves machines and his factories next to each other to spare his workers time wasted by walking an extra step. Time is money, and money is everything. That's how it goes when one thinks exclusively through the logic of economic gains. In my time on the prairie, we used to work up to 16 hours a day to make sure that the harvest got done in time. Damned everything else. We could, under these conditions, only work like Negroes, as slaves. We labored roughly and we labored ugly. We had no encouragement for doing pretty work, what could be considered by the intelligent worker as something of ethical value. In the cold mornings, we warmed our cans of oil by lighting bushels of wheat. We had no time for gathering straws and making a fire. Now, this part here aside, um, this is another one of the ancient mind, or the traditional mind thoughts here, where there's different spiritual values to work. There's the ability to do work pretty. There's the aesthetic sensibility to a job well done. To, as we talked about earlier, the embellishments on a cathedral, spending God knows how long perfecting it. And then there's the slave labor, which is probably often the everyday labor. In my work and Bugman video, I talked about how the modern notion of work is something Evola criticizes, and it's something that is very difficult to separate for any Protestant, culturally Protestant, at least, person, because we tie a lot of our value to our work, or our career, or our job. When you meet new people, the first thing they ask you is, "What do you do?" And you say, "Oh, I'm a systems developer," right? And you're proud of saying that because I deliver value to society. I make software and I make it good, and that's all well and good. But and that's something I want to get into soon in one of the probably the next video I make once I just read the script is the difference in doing work that is just work and work that connects you to people and connects you to places, and that can be pretty work and that can be lasting work, and it's something that binds you in a metaphysical sense to both the future and the past. All right. Human life may very well be short, but let us at least make spare time to actually live it. By hurrying as such, we only tear ourselves apart and become useless way before our time. Festina lente. You Americans seem unable to settle for the small things. You want to be on the top. You want excess. The Oriental stands as the counterpart with his frugality, his innate ability to do without. I remember seeing the riders in Persia on their steeds interchangeably bite into a loaf of bread and a handful of grapes, as it was their meal. They could do without meat. They could also do without a gilded pocket watch. I asked my rider when we would arrive in the next town. He looked at the sun and said, "We will be there within the time of the great heat." He was referring to the midday heat. What a poetic time of day, almost like a verse. Americans will reply that any comparison is impossible. A Ford wagon would have made the same journey in less than an hour. Persia is one thing. Progress is another. My rider was piloting a horse. He had time for that. It fit him perfectly. And he entertained himself along the road with his companion steed. Someone asked the horse if it wouldn't mind hurrying, as if it didn't feel any shame. "Look at the sun," the rider said. "Would you rather we burn alive?" Progress, what is that? That we may drive faster on the roads? No. If man balances his books by such methods, he will be sure to come up empty-handed. Progress is the body's required rest and the soul's required peace. Progress is human satisfaction. And that's the end of the essay. And his conclusion is pretty much that the Americanisms that he talks about is gonna run America into the ground, I guess, that if they don't adopt more spiritually traditional values. And I do really like the "we will be there within the time of the great heat." What a poetic time of day. We're still on Hamsun, yes. This is all on Hamsun. And this is pure Hamsun. This is not like he's semi-quoting from someone else, but this is all Hamsun. And you know, he's writing this as many other radicals, not radicals, reactionaries, around the turn of the century, a bit before the 1900s, and a bit after. And when you read him, and when you read his works, you and with many other reactionaries as well, you read their works and you get to like a sentence or a passage, and you read it and it's like, wow, that could just as easily have been written today. And it's not that deep to say that, but it just tells us that, you know, we haven't really learned. And it also, you know, reaffirms me that reading things from before 1945 is a worthwhile effort. I'll go back to the photos again, and we'll go back to the one here. I am out of articles. If you have any comments or questions, you can post them in the chat, and we can chat for a bit. But I'm out of content, so I will just remind you to subscribe if you haven't. You gotta click the bell. That's the thing now. I keep forgetting if YouTube is weird with the bell thing. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And you will get a pling whenever I upload. That might help because I have been slightly stupid in my name choice, by choosing Walrus. I get a lot of overlap with with kids channels. All right. Very good stream. Thanks, Walter. Thank you too, Romantic Gamekeeper. Thank you for being here for the entire duration. Live streaming is not something I am very very familiar with. This is my first time. Let's see. Let's bring this up. Is there an monophthalmos? That was a nice word. Is there an order in which to read Hamsun's works, or some that are a better choice as a start? It depends on what your goal reading him is. I wouldn't say there's necessarily one like you have to do it in this way. But I would recommend, if you want a more, and also because he writes traditional novels, he this isn't philosophical critique. There's no building blocks. So this is more free form, right? But I would recommend starting with Hunger, mostly because that's his authorial breakout hit, and in that you will get a straight up sort of bleak look at modernity in an 1800s city. It's not a very fun book. I think it's a very depressing book, and it's focusing a lot on the internal life of the author. So it's partially an autobiographical book, and then there's a bit of strange ones you can do if you want to, but like, if you just want to get a hold of his ideas, you should probably just go straight to Growth of the Soil, which is his most famous one. And that's the most traditional one. It contains his worldview, basically, in a condensed, distilled sense. If you want to get really into his life, you can read on Overgrown Paths, which is something he wrote in 1949 after the World War, in which he basically goes through his life. He semi-fictionalizes it, and sort of tries to explain and apologize, I guess, his alignments during World War II. If you're interested in that part of him. Personally, I am not, because I am not interested in, I'm in an academic sense, I guess I'm interested in the mid-century Germans, but I don't think they're right in any sense. There's more than enough right-wing critique of the mid-century Germans, and I think if you look into that, you'll realize how far off it is. Can you make more videos on the traditionalist thinkers like Gwenon Shon? I am actually reading Gwenon right now, so it's probably gonna come at some point. But I'm furiously buying books and trying to keep up. So probably is the answer. Thoughts on the reactionary primitivism of today is largely pushed by people who have a big part of their life and culture rooted in internet culture and technology. Right. It's something that I've thought about a bit. I think it's more just, it's nomadism. It's there was some talk, maybe it was a clip from the live stream that Prudentialist had last night about the Kyle Rittenhouse not guilty verdict. But someone talked about how a lot of people that end up in these circles are or was it like an old AA Gold stream? Someone talked about how a lot of people who end up in these circles tends to be quite a bit, you're, I don't want to pat you on the back and say you're different, but it requires a certain individualism to be able to say, you know what, I'm gonna actually try to investigate this stuff and try to break through the truth regime. And so you end up with a lot of people who suddenly wake up to something, but everyone else around them either won't, or you feel that, ooh, I gotta hide my power level, and you stumble on some people online who, oh wow, all of these people think the same as me, and suddenly you have a culture. And it's also part of how the internet works. I mean, it's easy to, if these thoughts are quote unquote the enemy of our current state, or regime, um, then the internet is a nice way of at least somewhat put a filter and anonymize the discussion, and try to hide it away. Um, um, but I think when it comes to like having your life rooted in life and internet culture, that's certainly something that you could be better at. And it's something that you see again and again in this circle, is you find a lot of programmers in here, and I think that comes from some of the same thing. It's people who get paid to analyze systems, and then we apply that sort of like Curtis Yarvin does to the world around us, and we realize, holy shit, something is very wrong. And because we work on the computer, it's easy for us to sort of go to the computer to try to look for answers. Right, trait disagreeableness, as Jordan Peterson would say, and I guess that's I don't remember which psychology field the traits are from. I hope that answered your question, Romantic Game Paper. Love from India. Hello. Don't worry, you're only competing with National Geographic and the Beatles. How does one acquire such a fly-ass stash? I don't know. All of these like men from like, you look at like every World War I general, and like they have these fantastic mustaches. And I mean, I'm sure if I spent like a year, I could easily grow that amount of beard. But I mean, you'd have to look homeless for like months. I have like a short beard that I trim at like maybe 7 millimeters. And I've had for as long as I can remember. But going longer than that, and I'm just going to start looking disheveled, and it's not something I enjoy. I guess that's part of my right wingness that my parents taught me to. I should always try to present myself clean. Growth of the Soil, for a look into Primitive's life and story. Read his essays if you want to click. Yeah, and his essays are a bit hard to come by, but yeah, you can also read his essays if you want just straight up, his thoughts. And a lot of his essays or articles are also letters he writes to other people, and they're not necessarily philosophical in nature, but they can be a fun read anyway. Some of these intellectuals back in those times have some pretty scathing lines that they send back and forth to each other. How does the 1966 film compare, in your opinion? I haven't seen the 1966 film, I'm sorry. So I'm going to have to take a rain check on that. I'm not a scholar on Hamsun. Unfortunately, I just wanted to sort of make something and bring him into the spotlight. And at least I'll have something to point people to in case I reference him in further discussions. I have seen Growth of the Soil, the 1921 version. How is compares to you think that the book? I think it's a faithful enough representation. I do not have a walrus mustache. Maybe that's what I should. I think my wife would hate that. Step over that entire decade. I think you're talking about the 40s. Yeah, there's no value in discussing it. You know, it's just to say it happened. Critique it from the right if you have to, but it doesn't provide us any value. Trait disagreeableness and autism, basically, yeah. In a sense, and you can say that it requires another thing to be a weirdo like me and get enjoyment from talking to strangers on the internet like this. And that might not be people who are, there you need different casts and different roles of people to be able to affect societal change. And if you create videos, you're most likely a certain type of person, or at least you have certain traits, and you can only have so many of, you can only have so many I don't know, I'm thinking of video games because I'm a millennial, but you can only have so many character classes in a party, right? Before it starts becoming difficult. I saw the 1991 documentary about Hamsun's late life. Focuses a lot on his views, him being ostracized by using the company. Yeah, and that's what you see with a lot of his, a lot of the official sources on him as well. Everything from when the war starts to after is very overshadowed by this, and that's fine. It is an important thing to talk about when you talk about him, but I think that overshadows his actual views and his contribution, if anything, to reactionary thought, and at least his contribution to the literary world should be remembered. Not to blackbill anyone, but prior to World War II, Hamsun was the pride author of Norway, very beloved, and became a bit of an aristocrat. Yeah, he was. And he died in poverty because he had to pay pretty much everything he owned, like in terms of money, in reparations for the war. He wasn't tried in any sort of, like, he wasn't on trial, and he wasn't in any danger for being executed, but he was tried in a civil court, I think, and had to pay a fine to someone or something, or the state. I don't quite remember the details. So he ended up being very poor, and his mind was starting to go. And that's also when you write, if you read the Overgrown Paths book, it really becomes the ramblings of an old man. Um, so that's a bit of a sad conclusion to a very smart and great author, I think. Especially considering that he had no formal education. A lot of his peers, in terms of authors, well, yeah, he was too famous to execute, probably. Uh, was very often, sons of merchants, or sons of, they came from wealthy families, and had a lot of resources. And Hamsun was. It's not that his father owned a rather large farm, but I don't think they were wealthy in that sense. They were wealthy in the sense that, the estate was large, but the cash flow wasn't necessarily huge, which is why he had to move to his uncle, and later why he just ended up fleeing, because he hated it there. I think it was because his uncle was like a stern Christian or something. Yeah, well, I mean, it depends. Like, he you're right in that he didn't think his mind was starting to go. We know, I mean, a lot of sources tries, at least mentions that his eyesight and hearing was going. And some mentioned that his mind was going. He himself would probably not agree to that. And when you read Overgrown Paths, it's strange if you're going to write a book about how your mind is intact, and you write about your life and then you start including things that aren't true into your life, you're not really doing yourself a service. Um, so, it's a difficult thing to say. I honestly think it doesn't matter uh, whether or not his mind had gone, um, because the end result is the same. He bet on a horse and he lost, basically. He went all in, and I don't think he was the only one. And if we're going to talk about like the mid-century Germanism, I think some of it, a lot of his fascination comes from a love of pure Germanism rather than the uh, the uh, the mid-century Germanism, a general love for the German culture and the German spirit, uh, rather than the ideology itself. But I mean, I'm probably uh, well, it depends on who you. But it's hard to verify Innkeeper. But that's what I've encountered. That there are claims from his lives. There are characters in his life, or there are characters in Overgrown Paths that he includes that aren't real people, but they're inserted into real historical occurrences, I guess is the way to put it. Which again might just be a way of him expressing himself, um, but if you're making a case for why you're completely sane, doing that is a bit of a difficulty. Some Dane wrote a book after the war, which he gave a scathing critique of our treatment of Hamsun. I forgot what it's called, and do you know what I'm talking about? I think I might, but I'm not sure if I have the actual. Let me look on my reading. I copied like every citation I could find on Wikipedia. No, I'm sorry, I can't find it. But it does ring a bell. That's all I can say. But in general, what it comes down to is, reading Overgrown Paths doesn't really give you anything, because you're steeping yourself in the Overton window of 1945 anyway. So if you're gonna read Hamsun, read Hunger, read his articles, read Growth of the Soil, and you'll have pretty much everything you need from him, at least. And it's not that the things he included in right, yes, there's the name. Yep. Let's see if I can find the actual book here. I think it's just called the trial or something, the treatment of Hamsun. It's something. Yeah, if you want to read it, it's there. Again, in a sort of ride the tiger mentality, it doesn't provide any real value. So it's up to you. Okay, well, I think I've answered every question that has been fired, and we've been unrelated, but I read Brave New World, the machines. Well, it certainly fills your head with a lot of a lot of reject modernity narrative, um, and I think it's a bit of the same thing as I mentioned earlier with the Rittenhouse trial. It's good to know these narratives and to be able to switch between sort of this modern and this traditional worldview when analyzing the world around you. Uh, but it's also important to stay atop the tiger, as Evola would say. Um, Going out and doing something spicy isn't gonna change the world before the time's coming. And I think you'll know when the time is right. Okay. We've been streaming for about 2.5 hours. I think it's time for me to log off. Thank you for watching. Thank you to those who stuck around. Subscribe to a walrus if you haven't, so that I can hit the feature milestones and deliver more stuff to the ether. Thank you for watching.